Hi everyone, I'm Donna. Thank you for joining me as I take you through my process of creating this mixed media page. Before making a start, I'm just prepping my page by putting some masking tape down the centre of that spine. This just gives it a little bit of protection from when I come in with some paint and inks later. Next, I'm going in with a layer of clear gesso, which has quite a grainy texture to it and creates a protective layer on the page ready for painting and any other mediums I might choose to use. As you can see, I'm making sure that my page is really well covered and that it's all nice and dry before I continue. Once my page is all prepped, I begin by gluing down my base layer. The papers I'm using are quite neutral coloured, things like sheet music and book pages. I try not to think too much about this because at this stage it really is all about creating that first layer of texture and dimension. We may or may not be able to see these papers at the end, but don't worry about that. It's all part of the process and it allows us to create without the fear of a blank page. I also like to use washi tape on this layer to fill in any little gaps and to add another layer of interest. Again, I'm choosing neutral coloured washi that have more textual elements such as the script or this grid pattern. Once I'm happy with this layer, I give it a good dry with my heat tool, paying particular attention to the edges to make sure that they are nicely stuck down. And then I decide to quickly add an extra piece of interest to the blank space to the left. Next up is white gesso, which I use a lot when I'm creating a page just to give some balance and dimension. I typically start in the centre of the page and work my way out, using a small brush to apply the gesso and then my finger to blend it out. You can see how I'm using the gesso where the papers meet, and I do this to kind of blend the papers together to create some cohesiveness to the background. Again, I try not to think too carefully about this and I just apply the gesso along those joins and where I feel it's needed. As we build up the layers, we'll also build up the gesso, so again, don't worry if a lot of this starts to become covered. I'm next using a layer of texture paste and a stencil to add a third layer of dimension. I wasn't entirely sure what I had in mind for my finished page, but I really liked this almost cracked stone-like effect of the stencil and thought it would work well as a backdrop to whatever my focal point turned out to be. Once I was happy with my texture layers, it was time to start adding colour. I'm using a Tim Holtz spray in tea dye and then spritzing with water to help the colour to move around the page. I'm just tilting the page in different directions to encourage the colour to move between the texture paste. To make some areas darker, I'm going in with more sprays and this time moving the colour without the extra water added. This way the colour stays more concentrated. I really liked how that darker colour was forming long drips down the page and I thought it mimicked the shape of the stencil really nicely. I repeated at the bottom of the page, tilting in the opposite direction to get the same effect. I was careful to mop up any excess from the spine to prevent it from becoming too wet and soggy, and I also used my heat tool to help move some of that colour further. I just continue with this process until I'm happy with the amount and depth of colour. I'm coming back in now with more white gesso to start building up areas on the page that I want to be brighter. I concentrate a lot of the gesso in the centre where my focal point is going to be, as well as picking out areas on the side of the page and in between the texture paste. I work in thin layers of gesso, gradually building up the colour and using that same technique of applying with a brush and blending with my finger. I wanted to add a bright and contrasting colour, so I chose this acrylic ink in Violet. I had never used this before, and as you can see, I wasn't getting a lot of movement from it to begin with. Adding water helped, and I just experimented with different amounts of ink and water until I was happy. I used that same tilting technique to achieve that drip effect that I had achieved with the distress stain. Stamping's a great way to add extra texture, so I added just a little bit to the white space at the edges. To add further interest, I found these lovely pink flowers on a napkin, and I decided to decoupage them onto the page. I was absolutely loving the way the background was looking at this point. Concentrating again in the centre of the page, I added more white gesso, measuring the area against the size of the die cut that I had chosen to use. I like to frame my focal points with white gesso, so I just wanted to make sure that I was applying the gesso in the correct place, and I just dabbed the colour down with a piece of tissue. I then added foam to the back of my die cut. One reason for doing this is that it allows it to stand up off the page and therefore adding dimension. And secondly, it will allow me to keep adding colour or extra elements underneath it if I wish. Back in with the white gesso to define this area further. I had found a journaling card in the same kit as the die cut, so I cut out some of the wording to add to my piece. I always like to balance a focal point with a sentiment or word or collection of words, and I felt that this fitted perfectly. This is a Derwent Inktense pencil in the colour charcoal grey. It's a water-soluble pencil, and I'm using it to add definition between the texture paste and also around the edge of the page. The good thing about these pencils is that because they are ink based, once they're dry they are pretty much permanent, although you do have to work quite quickly with them. I'm using that same pencil to go around the edges of the flower and also the text to make them stand out from the page a little bit more. I continue to build up the colour until I've reached the intensity that I want. Then I go around the edges with a fine liner to make the elements pop even more. I'm adding another layer of the white gesso to develop the intensity of the colour that I wanted in contrast to the black that I had just added to the page. Followed by splashes using the white gesso and a black acrylic paint. At this point, I felt like I had lost the roses a little bit, so I went in and added 2 more roses where I had originally placed them. And here is my finished page.